Greetings to you all, and thank you for participating. My name is David Cameron. We're in for a real treat tonight, a conversation between Brian Stewart and David Crombie, our honored guest. And they're talking about the life and times of Toronto after the pandemic has passed. This topic feels very timely because the first timid green shoots of our post-COVID life are just now springing up around the city. Although all of us, I suspect, have a little niggling worry at the back of our minds that a new variant of the virus could push us into a fourth wave if we're not careful. This event is part of the Heart of the City Speakers series, sponsored by St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in downtown Toronto. While this is a virtual event, with luck, our series will be able to return to in-person meetings in the autumn. We hope to explore this general topic of post-COVID Toronto further in the fall. So we're delighted that you're joining us today. Brian Stewart will be introducing David Crombie, but let me just say that I know of no politician or former politician whom I admire more, and that is largely because David is a human being first. A warm, funny, principled, authentic human being, and a politician second. I've known and worked with him for years in one guise or another, and it's been a relationship that I treasure. But I'll let Brian do the formal honors. Brian is a long-standing member of the St. Andrew's congregation who has had a highly distinguished career as a CBC journalist and broadcaster. We're fortunate indeed to have Brian as the moderator of our speakers series and of this event. Brian, our thanks, and I'll pass the baton to you.
Well, thank you very much, David. This is a very emotional moment for me. I was thinking the other day that I first met David Crombie 59 years ago. First met him when he was my professor, journalism, one of my professors, 1962, and he was an effervescent and lively and bouncy character then, as he is to this day now. I remember him particularly fondly because he was one of those teachers you always remember who taught you somehow to take the most complex questions and puzzles in life and boil them down to their essence. He held our hands during the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. And it's moving for me now to talk to him over a huge arc of decades from the Cuban Missile Crisis to the COVID crisis. David, by the way, I should mention, for those who weren't around when David was mayor, he really was, even before he became mayor, one of the great originators of the Toronto civic movement that brought this country, had North America agog really, in the development of Toronto from the 60s on. He's had a profound influence on the downtown, on affordable housing, on neighborhoods. He's about as important a mayor as ever has served in this city, and indeed one of the most important in North America. David, David Crombie this time, I want to turn to you and ask you, you never seem to have lost your enormous affection for Toronto. But I recall even back in 1962, it always was a very special place for you, was it not?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much for the introduction. It took me back to almost 60 years. That's amazing. Has Toronto been a part of me as long as I can remember? My parents and grandparents, family generally had a strong interest in the city. I was raised to think that Toronto could always be a special place, and it was, no matter what its general prevailing rules of living where. People found ways to enjoy themselves with whatever resources they had. I was raised in the west end of the city, in what was then the village of Swansea. It was 1 square mile, bounded on 3 sides by water, the Lake Ontario, the Humber River, and Grenadier Pond. So we grew up in the city with a sense of nature, interesting enough, about us. And so that the ideas of community, the idea of living with nature, the idea of being in a city and what it could be, that was just part of the DNA of being raised in the place. So yes, it's been with me, and I've lived in other places, but it's always been home and still is.
How do you think when you look at Toronto now across these years, and it has faced the worst crisis in 100 years, how do you think it actually fared as a city now when you look at it?
How it fared through the pandemic?
Through the crisis, yes. What
Yeah,
kind of marks would you give it?
I think it fared very well. And if you mind you, it has to be said that although those of us who have an interest in journalism always look to see if there's any bad news that we can report, it was really hard to. It wasn't hard to do, but there was lots of good news that we just let go by because people, interestingly enough, in my judgment, took the pandemic, and by and large, people said, how do we get out of this? We have to hold hands with one another. We have to figure out how we're going to do it together. I think politicians did a good job. I think those who follow politicians, and I think has to be said, people from PSWs, personal care workers, all of that, people really did well. And if I can say so, if it's done so well, in a place that's as large as Toronto, almost 3 million people and up to 9 million in the general area, the credit goes to those who every day had to show up and explain what was happening. So however you supported or did not support John Tory, for example, as the mayor of Toronto, he did a hell of a job, and still is. He of course only speaks in paragraphs, so it's not, you have to be patient with him. But he's done a wonderful job, and I think that can be said of many mayors and councillors and politicians who had a responsibility. So I think we fared very well. I think also the press. The press. There's an old-fashioned term. But I think journalism, media served us well. There was everybody sometimes looking too hard for the bad news, sometimes being a little harsh, all of that. But I think it was, so for me, I would give it really high marks, both, let me say, the media and public officials.
And I'm not sure I would have bet 2 years in advance of COVID or 3 years in advance, it would handle it that well. This was a very divided city in many ways, was it not, before the real crisis hit?
I think that's right. And it did. You can see that actually on the council. And people had clear political loyalties, both political party loyalties, but as well as ideological loyalties. And I think they made sure. I think they must have had little pep talks in the wee hours of the morning, saying, "For heaven's sake, we got to hang together, because if we don't, people will get worried." So I think people really did accept their responsibilities. So good, really good stuff. And maybe, I'm not sure, once the bell rings and says we're back in the clear again, we may go back to some old habits. But my feeling is that people who automatically opposed one another before the pandemic found that they had to work together a little better and more during the pandemic. That won't be entirely lost. And it actually, I think, takes me back to the way politics was perhaps more not amicable, but there was more respect for the opposition in many ways in the past. And I think that's where it simply brought it back to that. So it reminded me of how it used to be. Were there differences of opinion? Yes, but to be offered respectfully, all of that. So I think that that's the good news coming out of the pandemic.
Well, that leads naturally to another question, that the city was badly damaged. All cities were, all nations were. It's been a global horror story. But are there aspects of the crisis that Toronto could use to its advantage? That there's an old saying, I think, never fail to make use of a crisis.
No, I think
are there areas that we can come out of it stronger in any way?
I really do think so. I think in all the important ones too. The important aspects of any city, certainly Toronto, are the nature of its economy, its relationship with nature, its ecology, and the health of its community. Those are the three things: ecology, economy, and community. And I think in all three of those, we've had to make changes, which we thought on an interim basis, we had to pay attention to them and see what was going to come out of it. We are, of course, in the midst of and have always been, I guess, in some ways, whether it's low grade or high grade, kind of revolution. Toronto changes all the time. When you and I were at Ryerson in 1962, you picture Ryerson in those days. And what was this economy like? What was his understanding of nature? What was its understanding of community and diversity of community? I mean, all three things now really earmark the city for its future. And that is a massive change in its economy. I mean, the digital universe, I mean, it's unbelievable. If my father or your father, mother came back to life for a little bit and walked down the street, they wouldn't know what the hell was happening, because people are standing in the corners talking into little pipes so there's a whole world of change in the economy. If you don't think there's a change in the community, you look at the community of 1962. A characteristic of Toronto is its diversity. We know that. It's a cliche, and it keeps on. We are one of the few places in the world that understands that the economy grows through immigration. Other people think immigration's a problem. Right. We think it's a source of opportunity. And indeed, in the middle of the pandemic, the federal government increased the immigration to 420,000 or whatever the number is. We actually increased it, whereas immigration becoming suspect in other places. So, so a change in the community, a change in our relationship with nature. My goodness, when in 1962, Ryerson, like all other people in other places, were saying, well, the important thing about nature is the wealth we can get by digging it up, burying it, or whatever we needed to do to twist it around to make a living out of it, right? Not condemning it, but that was a fact. Today, we're now doing the opposite. We're trying to find ways in which we relate the economy, ecology, and community rather than keep them separate. So are we in for a change? That change has been going on for a while, but I think the pandemic sharpened our instincts for what we need to do.
It was that period when you were very active, and it's just starting to build up for your eventual run for mayor, that I learned not to bet against Toronto. In 64, 65, I left the city because I thought, this is the dullest city I could ever imagine. And you bet on this city and said, this is going to be the city of the future. You were way right, absolutely right. You ended up in the cover of Time magazine for the greening of Toronto. I mean, the city had the continent, and it was agog at the amazement of Toronto's growth, and it still has that ability to change. Having said that, I wonder what your hierarchy of worries are right now. I mean, you must have worries that you say, we can't flub this. We cannot have a stumble here.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that we've always worried about. We have to worry about even more now. One of those, and these are not new, people will know them, but let me remind them. One is a growing inequality of condition of life for people. Now, we've always had inequalities for sure, but it was never as stark. The difference in incomes is so great, and the difference of what incomes can do in terms of people's appreciation of life is so great. So a major issue, and it comes from the immigration. It comes from the diversity in our population. But we have an inequality that needs to be dealt with, and that can be dealt with in lots of ways, in all levels of government and in all levels of society. One of the things that contributed to that inequality in the past 30 years, in my judgment, was that the loss of understanding of the importance of the public realm. We took the view that from about 1980s on, early 80s on, that somehow if it was bad, it was done by government. If it was good, it was done by the private sector. That our job was to make sure that we did not trust our government as we ought to, as we used to. That we needed to move forward in a kind of an Americanization of our attitudes. It's interesting to note that all the old arguments that were made then and lost are now being made again, both here and in the U.S., in the UK, and other Europe, and they are being made now, but they're being made to win. People understand that there is an economy that needs to be mixed. You may remember when you went to Ryerson, the economists, people who taught you economics talked about Canada's economy being a mixed economy. And that died in the latter part of the 20th century as we gave up that thought. So I think you're seeing now a change, but what we did do was not pay attention to the power and importance of the public sector. It gave equality of opportunity through schools. It gave equality of opportunity through recreation programs. All of those things. And now we have to check our finances again, find ways in which we can gather together funds that are expended on the public generally in those kinds of services. So extension of the public realm is one of the things that you're going to find, I think, during this current century. And in a way, it's taking us back to where we were before. In some ways, everything old will be new again.
There's something really striking about that comment, and I agree with it entirely. There was a period when Canada was in what was called the age of deference. I mean, we still were polite to politicians. We respected people in public office. Come the Watergate period, all across the world, I'm afraid the media got involved in a kind of investigative attack on government. And it really did start I think, a souring of a lot of public attitudes that have really gone on, as you point out, since the 1980s at least. So we're talking decades of a growing feeling that government isn't quite up to the task. Right. Politicians are inept, lazy, corrupt, you name it. There is this kind of sourness that perhaps only COVID is going to have enough of a shock effect to get us out of that kind of mindset, automatic mindset.
I think that's right. Even the people with the hardest of tasks, who have the simplest of lives, PSWs, public service work, the people, the personal care workers, they were like a legion of honor throughout the whole of the pandemic. And yet people didn't give them a damn thought, mostly, unless they were directly related to them in some way. So we're rediscovering perhaps a little bit, I don't want to put too fine an edge on it, but a little bit of the importance of the dignity of labor, as they used to call it years ago. And there's a recognition that even if the pay is low, the cause may be really strong. And that's what we found with the personal care workers, as an example. So I think the pandemic did again say you need to look at your values again. And the values are that there is something about the dignity of labor, no matter what it is. It's an old fusty phrase, but on the other hand, the other word for it is respect for the other guy.
Absolutely.
And so secondly, though, the idea that we have people who've got, one of the corporations decided that they were going to give an increase in income to the members of the board when we're in the middle of a pandemic. There was a sense that somehow people have lost their sense that they're part of a larger community, and that's going to be, I think, recaptured in a post-demic world. That the idea of community has always been a strong one, always will be a strong one. It's always been part of Toronto's story. I mean, if you really want to understand Toronto, you have to understand all of its communities. I think that's the notion and the importance and power of community is going to come back much more strongly.
What about the concern that many people keep rising all the time, often involving their own neighborhoods? And that is small business. The small business in this city must have taken an incredible body blow. Can it come back? Is there something the citizens can do to help small business come back? How vital is it to the city?
Yeah, I think if people remember one rule, they will come back. It's a simple one, and everybody learned it. My mother used to repeat it almost like a catechism. Shop local. Shop local. Why? Because local businesses are the knuckles of a community. They're the thing that keep it together, right? And that's one of the failures of post Second World War housing and neighborhood building is that we built vast areas of housing with no stores, no businesses in them. You had to go out in your car to get them. That's being recaptured, called the 15-minute city. Planners today call it the 15-minute city, and that is where the services are walkable. And so, shop local is a many blessed thing because it not only anchors neighborhoods but makes livelihood for people who have an obligation to the community. So that's why you'll see the signs during the pandemic, please shop local, even more so now because these people were dealt out. The benefits of having local health in retail particularly, but services generally, is really important. And that people I think people are now thinking that it was really just because they could go to a place and have a drink on the street, right, or on the sidewalk, that now is nirvana, right? I mean, people are appreciating local services and local businesses. And can local businesses come back? Small little factories as well? Yes, it can if you shop local.
But it really involves an act of will on the population to turn back a bit from the ordering online, which has been proven so easy and agreeable during the COVID.
No, and that's right. And shopping, it's not going to go away, nor should it. Shopping online has its place. But I think if you keep in mind one thing, wherever you can, shop local. All you have, it's all being asked. And by the way, it's not a bad thing to walk over or take your bike over to do it. So it has it serves many things if you shop local. And that's not going to take away from the new technology that has delivery. We used to have delivery, by the way. People forgot all this stuff with Uber and Lyft and all of those. When I was a kid, the milkman delivered milk. The bread man delivered bread. The coal man delivered coal. The ice man delivered ice, right? So we had delivery, right? Then, now many of them were local.
Sure.
They were local places. So you can, my guess is that what you may find is that those larger places like Uber serve larger concerns like Uber and Lyft and whoever else, they are going to do what McDonald's did. What McDonald's did was move into the neighborhoods. When McDonald's first started, they were simply on main streets, right? And I remember the day that George Cohen from McDonald's said, "We're going to move into the neighborhoods." You'll find that so they're shopping local. Go to your local McDonald's. Well, go to your local, but Lyft will find itself, I think, and Uber find itself paying more attention to their base in the neighborhoods.
What about the other aspect of one of the other aspects of the city that the downtown area you're so identified with in a positive way? I remember the eerie feeling, I'm sure we all do, of driving through the downtown in November or December and seeing the dark buildings, the signs saying "Stay home," the sort of a ghost town taking over Toronto. And I wondered, is this a mortal blow? Could it be a mortal blow? How do you think the downtown, which of course encompasses the office space, the affordable housing, and now the vertical neighborhoods that are going up, how do you think that will come through?
Well, that first of all, should note that having nothing happen on a Sunday is part of our heritage, of course. Right? I mean, only in Toronto did we lock up the swings and block the teeter-totters and slides, right? So, and we used to joke. I joked about that with some people walking down, as you were saying, through the city streets and being closed down. But to be, I think you're going to find, you're already finding, there's a lust for people to gather together on the streets. There's a lust, and people got a little more money than might normally had because they weren't able to spend it anywhere. So I think it's just going to be an unseemly lust for at least the first couple of months as people get back and say, "Oh man, this is," so it's not going to hurt the city long term, not in my judgment. In fact, I think one of the things that's happened through the pandemic and was happening before for sure, was the city streets. We've absolutely transformed the city street.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Right? You may remember in 1971, 70, 71, and 72, I think it was, we had the Young Street Mall, all right? And that was basically from College down to Queen, and people sat out and had a good time. And so everybody thought pretty impressive stuff. Well, the mall has come to stay. City streets are now, how do I put it best? They are now used by so many different things. You got people and bikes and boards and even just single wheels. And the only one that's losing out is the car, because part of the thing that some people don't like to hear this, but we spent about 100 years, almost 75 years, 100 years, changing the city to accommodate the automobile.
Right.
So
right.
we widened the streets and chopped down the trees and straightened out the crescents and all of that stuff in order to make it better for the car. We've been spending the last 25, 30 years in very minor ways, but slowly gathering steam in limiting accessibility for the car and trying to convince people to find other ways other than the car. That is having a big change, I think, in the city, and you're seeing it even people I would know who had ordinarily 35 years ago been opposed to it. They're now looking for how do you chop up more of the street for good times rather than simply as a transmission belt for cars.
Right. Do you think we'll ever become really a patio city? Will these patios take off, do you think?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, we are. I think we are. I think we are already. Now, it began, you have to blame somebody, so I'll blame the Italians. Because when the massive Italian immigration came, others as well, but the Italians did it with such style. I mean, they warmed up the city and taught us about how to use sidewalks, and how to use the streets. So yes, I think that it's clearly within Toronto's tradition now. I mean, if you want any sense of how it's changed, in that way, you would remember Metro Caravan. Metro Caravan, for those who don't remember it or those who've forgotten it, from about started in 1968 until the end of the 80s. And it was actually a journalist by the name of Leon Kosser and his wife Zena who started it. And they had pavilions from around the city. The question was, how do you get people who come from all around the world, how do you get them to come together in some way? And so Metro Caravan was using music and cuisine. And we had, at the height, we had some 50 pavilions, right? And people asked me, so it was for 10 days, people would go and visit various neighborhoods, and they'd go in and have the cuisine and the music and the dancing and so on. And someone asked me once, whatever happened to Caravan? And the answer, of course, is the city became Caravan. You don't have to wait for 2 weeks a year to have cuisine from around the world. We could stand up to any city in the world when it comes to cuisine, for example. We're not so good at hockey. But
no, well, we have Montreal to rely on.
That's true.
Yes. When two older Torontonians get together, they always remember these incredible moments in the city. Driving through the downtown when it was empty, I did remember what it was like in a Sunday in Toronto in the late 50s. I was at a baseball game once down at the Maple Leaf Stadium, the old stadium that was there. And I think they were something like in the 8th inning on a Sunday, and the public announcer came on and told us all to go home.
Well, that's absolutely. No, that's absolutely right.
Players were out there looking around and said, what?
1952. and we adopted Sunday sport. Alan Lamport was the mayor, ran on it. But don't forget, it was only from 1 o'clock till 6 o'clock.
That's right.
And at 6 o'clock, that was it. You had your fun. No, exactly. And that stadium, by the way, and you and I shouldn't indulge in this, but you had a colleague in journalism at the time, student, Norm Simon.
Yes.
Right? And yes, Norm's still with us. He's in great shape. And he takes me to the ball game there in the beginning of the season, in the new stadium every year. I get a call from Norm. He's got a ticket. We go to his place and we watch the ball game. And then we remember the old stadium. It was a great stadium.
It was, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely fabulous.
That is the other thing. Toronto has always had, it's always been a really good sports town. We're not winners, but we're sure players.
Absolutely are, yeah. Listen, on the subject of the really worrisome things, though, going back again to the immigration aspect, are we not trying to square the circle? I mean, we desperately need immigrants. This city, as you say, is smart enough, wise enough to realize immigrants are a fabulous strength and an absolutely essential strength. But what about the housing? Where are we going to put the number of immigrants coming into the city unless we can somehow solve the affordable housing crisis?
Yes, absolutely. Housing is, if I had to pick one issue, I mean, transportation's always there, but affordable housing, I think, is the key. It was also, by the way, in 1972, when I became mayor of Toronto, the housing issue was top of the heap. People have forgotten that. And we ran on the basis, and the new Reform Council operated on the basis that our job was to put the city back into the housing business, and we did.
Yeah.
And we invented a department called Commissioner of Housing, and Michael Dennis was its commissioner, who went on to other things later on, both in London and New York. We built St. Lawrence neighborhood, all of that. So it has to be underseen and understood, and I think it is understood now in the city that there needs to be some work done at the city level. We also need to bring back the federal government. Bear in mind that much of our housing was co-op housing, and co-op housing died some while ago. It's now being brought back by some people, but we need a form of co-op housing. One of the things as well, and this is a very important one, I think, because it gives immediate opportunity, or almost immediate opportunity. We have lots of housing stock that is being wasted. That is to say, bylaws make sure that there are not as many people living in places as there could be. So let me rush to my own specific thing. My wife Shirley is in long-term care and has been for 10 years. I finally sold the old place, and I'd rented a little place for a while, but I now live over in Havelock Street with one of my daughters. Now, and she lives in a place on a port, I guess it's about 16-foot wide lot, right? The house is about 120 years old, something like that. And it's her son, when he's back from university, lives in the basement. I live in the main floor. She lives in the second floor, and her daughter, who lives in Montreal, whenever she comes back to visit now, she lives on the fourth floor. There's now 4 floors on this little wee place. That is known to planners as the missing middle housing. How do we get more housing by using existing stuff? And one of the things to do that, by the way, lane housing. She's also in a lane and can build in the back of her house, back of her lot on the lane. Now, I mentioned that as a specific example of a very large opportunity, and that is building housing in the missing middle. And it's because you can actually build lots of new housing, and you've already got services available. You've already got a neighborhood in being. You've already got local businesses there. This is Dufferin and Bloor, right? And there's a park there, and there's schooling. So there are ways. Now, the trick is to loosen up the bylaws, and to make sure that the bylaws can live for a new day to serve a new generation of need, not an old generation of an older need. Right. So it's new housing, there's lane housing. There are 4 or 5 different initiatives going on right now, which I have to again say, John Tory done a hell of a job about husbanding them along, or stewarding them along, I guess. So at any rate, yes, it's a big issue, but we need everybody now to pay more attention to it. The province needs to pay attention to it, and the federal government. The federal government, by the way, was a major player in when we did a lot of affordable housing through CMHC. Then they got out of the housing business and got into the housing insurance business, but they need to be more strongly in the housing business.
Do you think there are areas here where sort of the public square could be more active in the post-pandemic world? I'm thinking in terms of the pro-democracy groups, the citizens groups, the faith communities, the churches, the synagogues, the mosques, and that could take a more active role in trying to work through the post-pandemic area in areas we need real action in.
I couldn't agree with you more, Brian, and good for you for mentioning it, because again, we depended in those days, now 50 years ago, we depended on the churches, the unions, ethnic organizations. If you go down to St. Lawrence, it was housing for 10,000 to 12,000 people. Every one of those buildings except one, which was a public housing, they were all co-op housing, and we used the unions and used all of those ethnic groups and so on to build housing. The churches should take another look at it and do what they can. So should the unions, and so should any other kinds of organizations. Co-op is a good way to go because it gives people a stake in the place at a cheaper rate.
Absolutely, it's an interesting area. It'll see how, as they say, when churches come back together again, when synagogues and mosques do, and other faith communities, whether they will have new agendas that perhaps COVID opened up.
Yeah, but
reality to them.
No, and they need, but I think that they should be enticed with obviously good financial terms and other opportunities with these various groups, the union groups and the ethnic groups and the religious groups. It seems to me that there's a role that, well, there is a role that they can play, but the federal government in particular needs to take a leading role. CMHC gave us housing after the Second World War with mortgage. They did a great job. They did a great job with us in the 70s. They need to do a great job again now.
Okay, we can underscore that one. That's going to be an important one. I don't want to leave the impression at all here that you're a man of just memories. You are about as involved as you've ever been in this city. You were constantly in the newspapers nowadays. You were constantly on a board, a commission, the rest of it. And of course, I want to talk to you about three massive issues: the green belt, the waterfront, and transportation in the city. And I know that you were in the headlines in January because you, along with 6 others of the green belt, was it called the commission or the green belt?
Council. Yeah,
Council. Resigned in protest because effectively the government seemed not to be even listening to you. Could you tell us just how important this is for the city coming out of COVID, that we've got to center our attention on the green belt?
The green belt was one of the great accomplishments of the province of Ontario in 2005. And people had worked on it for a decade before that. But this was an opportunity to bring together a lot of sort of spots of green that had been done and fixed up over the years, and turn it into one large green belt around the city. So first of all, it's to be understood as an extraordinary accomplishment. Secondly, it was not simply a pretty color, green. It had ecological functions. And one of the things that's important to understand is that just simply calling it a green belt without understanding its importance ecologically in terms of clean water, in terms of dealing with floods, in terms of all of those, of biodiversity, all those important ecological issues, they really depend very much on understanding that nature is a continuing enterprise and is always changing, and it needs to breathe and go its way. And then you find ways in which to build what you want to build with that in mind. So at any rate, the idea of the green belt became so important to people that the government that we resigned from, as it were, even they understood that they couldn't take a run at the green belt, because the green belt is now in people's minds as a really good thing, and it is. And indeed, the government is, I think you're going to find the government of this government and any following government is going to be expanding the green belt because they know that the public wants that. And so it's a really strong part now of our world. A part of that green belt we underappreciate what we've actually accomplished in the green world. I am currently working on a map with some people. In fact, this afternoon, I'm talking with a map maker to try and bring home to people that we have an extraordinary amount of ecologically sound green space that we need to bring together even more beyond the green belt. Because we finally learned that the only way in which both our economy and our communities can survive is within a healthy ecology. We've learned that in the last 50 years. Some people knew that before, but we forgot that in the 50s and 60s. So the green belt is in a sense two things. One is it's a physical thing, a geographical thing, but it's also an idea, because the idea of the green belt is that ecology, they are interdependent. And so long as we keep that in mind, it'll be healthy. But if we don't keep it in mind, we'll end up hurting one or the other. So at any rate, despite the fact that I and others resigned from the green belt because we think the government was not paying attention, the power of the green belt and the power of the importance of ecology, even more so now with the pandemic, there's no government that is going to take a run against that.
So despite
I
the
think
dire circumstances, you're fairly confident the government's going to get the message.
Oh yeah, I think they've got the message, and they've got a new Minister of Environment. But you watch, I think you're going to find this is a government that says, gee, I think we'd like to expand the green belt. Now they've got some ways in which they want to expand the green belt, which I don't like, and we'll probably take, and others don't like, and we'll take a run at that. But that's in a sense a secondary war. The war has been won. Ecology. Listen, I was talking to one of my kids is a doctor, a woman, one of my daughters. She's in Hamilton, and she and other and the people in Hamilton, the doctors in Hamilton, hand out what they call green prescriptions. Why green prescriptions? We found out that taking a walk in a ravine, taking a walk along a pond,
right,
watching whatever it is on a small pond, go to the Grenadier Pond, that's healthy and it's cheap. So I think the pandemic drove home the point, and is driving home the point, that ecology has many, many uses. It's not just a pretty green.
And certainly one of the great ecological facts we have, which has proved an enormous pressure release, I think, for Torontonians during COVID, was the waterfront. I mean, to go down to the waterfront during this and see people just coming out of the apartments, or you name it, being able to walk along that beach. You actually think Torontonians much undervalue the waterfront still. You're tired of hearing that Chicago's got a better waterfront.
No, and it doesn't. I mean, I'm not tired of hearing it. I'm tired of hearing it because it's not true. You go to the if you stand on Michigan Avenue in Chicago and look out over the waterfront, let me ask you if you would like to do that in February. It's not possible, all right? You have to go down to Lincoln Park a bit. At any rate, but Toronto's waterfront has come out very nicely. I know that people have written all kinds of stuff and shown it's going to hell in a handcart. It's never going to be any good, blah, blah, blah. But it's a wonderful waterfront, and it's getting better as we go along. We're now giving birth at the Rouge to Canada's first national urban park. That's 4 times the size, by the way, of Central Park in New York. Right? It's size, wow. Let alone it's also wild. Wow. It's wild in the city, right? That's just one of the pieces of green. So on the waterfront, now, the great thing about the waterfront, you have to remember that if you're going to be looking for a better waterfront in terms of economy and ecology and community, then you have to go and understand that it is part of a watershed. It's at the end of a watershed. And so one of the things we learned when we were doing the Royal Commission many years ago on the waterfront, I was asked to take a look at the waterfront, make some recommendations. And there I was up there at the Oak Ridges Moraine, the Niagara Escarpment, all of those people. What the hell is Crombie doing up there? And that's because I learned from people who knew better that if you're going to deal with a waterfront long-term, you have to deal with the watershed long-term, because that's the waterfront is at the end of pipe of the watershed. And so you're going to have a healthy waterfront, have to have a healthy watershed. That's what made the green belt. The notion of the green belt was that if you're going to have a healthy waterfront, then you have to have a healthy interior up to the height of land, which is the Oak Ridges Moraine and the Niagara Escarpment. So, and I won't go on about it, but we have learned so much more. I think we're almost up to where Indigenous people were years ago, but we learned so much in the last 50 years on the power and importance of having a healthy ecology.
And definitely we need the public spaces. We need places where people can get elbow room and move around.
And not just for, as I say, the environment is not something you act on. The environment acts on you as well. It's an actor, not just being acted on. And so if you're looking to have clean water, then you have to have a healthy ecology. If you're looking for ways in which to deal with floods and all of that, we created the opportunity for floods. We created them, but by a way in which we went about dealing with nature in the city. Nature in the city and the city in nature is part of the new story of Toronto in the 21st century. There are two big things that Toronto will be known for around the world, in my judgment, by the end of the 21st century, is its human diversity and its way in which it's dealt with nature in the city and the city in nature.
Can it do that without getting transport right, though? I mean, what is it about transport in this city that we have so much trouble with?
Well, it is because we put, we followed the right thing. We followed the science, as they now say, follow the science. We did, and that took us to the automobile, and the automobile did change all of our transportation. There's no doubt about that. But it's been changing into other forms other than the automobile. Are we always going to have the automobile? Yes. Do we always need the automobile? Yes. But it became so much a part of us. I used to say that people would be happy if they could take their car and park it beside their bed so they could go to bed right away, right from the automobile. Well, all of that is changing substantially because there are other modes of transportation. Look at the bike revolution, and that's not for everybody, but it's for some people. There's now more skateboards. There's more walking. And again, as we were talking earlier, there's more 15-minute cities where it's all the services and things you need are within walking distance. So we're changing the needs that we had before, and we're creating our streets. We're now called complete streets, the planners call them, to provide more opportunity for different modes of transportation. Now, public transportation, we have made a mess of. We did a really good job in the early part of the century, or early part of the half century, up until, well, from about the 1940s through to the 1980s. And then we didn't do an awful lot. And so we're way behind in what we need, and we're so long on the planning, and we keep changing our minds. I won't go through it. It's a litany of talk and no action. But there are things that are now finally coming around. I think, and minds change properly. It used to be that subways was the only way. And that was the real guilt way of going. But I think people are saying that's pretty expensive. You have to undermine a whole bunch of other things. So maybe we should be having diesel. Not diesel. We should be having other forms of transportation that aren't simply underground. But whatever it might be, there's good transportation plans available, I think, that they've come up with in the last while. We do need to have a province that decides that it's going to work with the cities and not in spite of them.
Healthcare. Did COVID finally shake us by the lapels strongly enough to realize we do a lot more in healthcare?
Yeah, I think it did. But healthcare also, we've been pretty good with healthcare. I mean, try our American cousins and see that that our Medicare has been really one of the great things that this country did some years ago. In terms of public health, yes, I think far more interest is in it. The Board of Health in Toronto's done an outstanding job, and I think that's been true with other cities. So when it comes to public health, we've always been pretty strong on it, and I think yeah, there's lots of things we should have done and didn't do, but people have been honest about marking those things. So I think you are going to find, well, you will find, and properly so, more expenditure of money, more preparation for dealing with health issues before they happen.
One of the things you said before the COVID hit, I recall, was the need a city has like Toronto, a very, very strong critical need to make sure that a younger generation has their best shot. I mean, we sometimes let that perhaps fall by the wayside, but it is so critically important that this be a city where, you know, the young will not be embittered going forward. We're not being passions of populism or what have you, because they feel excluded from the city. Is this a city that is capable of giving the young really a decent, good shot? Oh,
absolutely, Brian. I remember reading an editorial. I was reading it years after it was written, but it was written in 1953 or something. And at the end of the editorial in the old Toronto Telegram at the end of the editorial, it uttered a phrase that everybody understood: youth must be served. All right.
Right.
Now I haven't heard that in quite a while, but on the other hand, we are rediscovering what happens if youth is not served. If we just assume that somehow they're a problem that you have to deal with rather than an opportunity to be cultivated. And I think that, again, current issues coming out of the pandemic are reminding people that there's an obligation to youth, for sure. And look at, if you, from my generation, I'm a little older than you, but by our generation, they just laid it out for us. I can remember my father saying, look, you guys have got all the opportunity. All you have to do is show up with some good manners.
That's absolutely true.
So our generation, and it needs to be said, I think, that the generation of our generation probably had it better than any previous generation, either before or since.
I cringe when I think that when I graduated from Ryerson, I think I had something like 6 job offers. And right. I was, according to your marking, nowhere near the top of the class.
No,
well down near the bottom of the class. But I mean, it's right. We were just this tsunami of opportunities.
Absolutely the case.
And so it's hard for us to get our mentality around the young today who are continually struggling for this and that. Where everything is a struggle.
But not only that, if you had to make ends meet, to get a little work, you had no trouble getting summer jobs that would take you through school. That would pay your way through school. Yeah. All of that. So those were now are people feeling? But I think people are now, for the first time again, looking at how our schooling is done because of the pandemic. When we didn't have schooling, when it wasn't there automatically, right? We didn't maybe pay as much attention to what was going on there. And I think now you're going to see more of that. There's even, I think, a new understanding that we have to look at our college system and see what value it brings to us for the money that's being spent and how it should be dealt with. So I think there's going to be renewal in education at all levels. And it's particularly so because of now everybody works, not just the male parts of the population. Everybody's working. Then schools have a far different function than simply teaching and learning.
Well, David, we're near the end of our time, but I have to ask you, you're in your, I think, mid-80s now. You never know it, but you are in your mid-80s. You've always had an energy level of about 5 people. Rarely run into someone who has so much energy. How do you intend to spend some of your post-COVID time? as the city comes back.
Thanks very much. Luckily for me, I'm going to continue to spend it as I've spent all my life. So I'm working on projects dealing with the greater Golden Horseshoe aspects of things, dealing with ecology, but also I'm still doing a little teaching, and so I'm just doing what I used to do, but I don't have to get elected to do it.
That means, if I was to attend one of your courses, I could be in the Guinness Book of Records.
Yes,
for
you
having
could.
gone the longest
That's
between
right.
2 lectures.
And you'll find out
60 years between lectures.
and you can find out he's peddling the same old stuff.
Anyways, it's been a delight talking to you again. You absolutely one of the great Torontonians. David,
Okay.
for a formal thank you, I'm going to pass you over to Will Ingram, the minister of St. Andrews. But it's been an absolute delight talking to you. I've just loved it.
Thank you.
Will?
Thank you, Brian. As Brian mentioned, my name is Will Ingram. I'm the minister at St. Andrews and also a member of the Heart of the City Speaker Series Planning Committee. And so on behalf of our chairperson, David Cameron, and the other members of our community, we did really truly want to express our sincere gratitude to David Crombie and to Brian Stewart for a truly engaging and thoughtful and very insightful conversation. These days, I think most of us seem to be doing our best simply to endure the pandemic and the closures to stay safe and make good and wise decisions for ourselves and for our loved ones. And we do not always get much of a chance to step back and set these daily struggles and challenges, changing as they seem to be constantly doing, into the wider context. And so today, your conversation, Brian and David, has given us such a wonderful opportunity to do so. And we're grateful. And particularly the three-part focus on ecology and economy and community has been a wonderful starting point for lots of thoughts and lots of reflections as we move through the pandemic and into a post-COVID world. We also wanted to extend a very special thanks to both of you for your own long-standing engagement with our society and for the ways that both of you have led and reported on and observed and helped all of us to understand the events of our times. On behalf of the Planning Committee, we wanted to offer a thanks to everyone who has taken the time to watch this presentation. As many of you know, the Heart of the City Speaker Series has been presenting events for quite a number of years now and has had a wide range of speakers. Most of them have been in person, followed by a lovely reception afterwards. This is the second online presentation that we've had, and we're really looking forward, as David Cameron mentioned earlier, to being back together in person this fall. And David Crombie, you are always welcome to come back and rejoin us for one of those events. It would be wonderful to continue the conversation. I invite everyone to just check the church website for more details and more information about upcoming events, and that can be found at www.standrewstoronto.org. And so thanks again to David Crombie and to Brian Stewart for their leadership in this wonderful conversation. And thanks to all of you for being part of this time of reflection and vision and hope for this city that we all so dearly love. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Will.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.